say, England to make less food and buy their grain from, let's say, the American Midwest and other places, and this brought down the food. As you can see in this cartoon here, Peel, the person who was behind the push for free trade, his monument is cheap bread, so people can afford to eat as much as they want, as much as they need to, or as much as they want. So Ricardo said is, look, you shouldn't try just to buy everything from one country. Every country should specialize in what they do best, and therefore we shouldn't keep out what is in other countries, and we should produce according to what he called our comparative advantage. And we'll talk about that more later in the course. So we have people in the early 1800s basically saying, actually, don't feed the poor, don't protect domestic workers, okay? Be a bad person. Being bad is so good. Well, in steps Marx into this, and he says, you guys are crazy. What you're describing is a stark utopia, right? You might be able to produce more, but the conditions under which people live are so inhumane that it's quite stark, you know? It's utopia in the sense that we'll produce more stuff than we ever had before, but we'll lead really, really miserable lives. And he says this classical economic stuff, this Adam Smith and David Ricardo and Thomas Malthus, you know, we have to get beyond this. Because if we live like that, we're going to live in a really degraded society. And Marx pretty said, look, it's not harmony. It's not the invisible hand bringing us together. What you see in history is class conflict. It's the haves and the have-nots. Okay, in ancient Rome you had emperors, and then you had like the citizens of the city who were being squashed and had to serve in the army. In the Middle Ages you had your lords, and then you had your serfs. Okay, there's always been conflict, and in the modern times you have conflicts between the capitalists who own the factories and the workers who work in the factories. So let's just look at this, because Marx really read this stuff very carefully. And he really had a critique. Everything that Adam Smith said was good, Marx said was bad. So for example, let's just take our Adam Smith versus Marx and put them into a cage match, and let's see how their ideas bear out. So Adam Smith said, look, the division of labor is good. Right? We'll produce more stuff, we'll all work together in this factory, we'll make lots of pins. And Marx says, actually no, that's going to lead to something he called alienation. And I mean, alienation's a big word, but just think of a Green Day song, that's alienation. The first thing he said, work wouldn't be meaningful, right? If all I'm doing is stretching a piece of wire out all day, you know, you've basically made me into a machine, right? I don't have any purpose. You know, what is the meaning of my life? My meaning of life is a stretch wire. He says, that's no way to live your life. And that's kind of bad because, you know, I never see myself doing anything. I never actually make anything myself. I'm just one fraction of the big picture. And therefore, I'll never really feel like connected to what I'm doing. I'm not going to be like a person who carves something with my own hands or grows my own food. I'm going to be so divorced from actually doing things that I'll be alienated. It'll feel separate from me. And we'll just become cogs in this big machine. And people will not know what their purpose is. And therefore they're all going to be dropouts and like become goth, emo people. And they're going to, let's say, go, I hate society, revolution. And basically people will be very, very unhappy because people want to do things. People want to see, you know, something from the fruit of their labors. It would be like saying if you did an assignment in school and all of you did a little piece of it, you wouldn't feel like the grade was yours because you shared it with so many other people. Now the second thing was this idea of the invisible hand. And Adam Smith basically, and I misspelled invisible here, so forgive me for, PowerPoint sins. Adam Smith said basically the invisible hand makes us all work together. Well, Marx said, no. This is not everyone dancing together in happy harmony. This is not like the Lollipop Guild in Wizard of Oz. This isn't going la 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 dancing together. It's actually exploitation. Some people are gaining, some people are losing. In fact, everyone is in conflict with each other. The capitalists are stealing from the workers are stealing from someone else, and that's really not, let's say, fantasy land that Adam Smith is cooking up. What capital does is it extracts labor's surplus value. It makes money not because it's productive, it makes money because it squeezes, remember that labor theory of value? It squeezes out the value of your labor and then takes it for themselves. Basically, the capitalists take all the credit for all the work that the workers are putting into their products. He also kind of differentiate between what he called exchange value versus use value. Exchange value is the value that you get in the market, supply and demand, how much something is actually worth, let's say the sticker on it, and what you have to pay for it. But he says there's another idea of value, which is what it's useful for, right? Think of, let's say you spend a lot of money on, you spent like $150 on designer jeans. That was its price in the market. But that's not actually how useful it is, because a $150 pair of jeans, clothes your nakedness just as much as a $10 pair of jeans. And so the use that you get out of it is not the same thing as the price you paid. But he said the problem is that Adam Smith says we're paying the use value, right? I want the butcher, the baker, the brewer, right? And I want to have beer and bread and meat, and it's because of the use of it, that's what gives it its value. And Marx said, no. People will put the value onto it, what they think is the money price, right? If we see something that's expensive, we think it's good. We don't, because it's good, put like a high price on it. So he's saying that how Adam Smith is describing how prices work is just basically not true. And the biggest thing is this idea of free labor. He says, look, go to any factory in England or Germany or America and look at the workers there. They're working 90 hours a week. You have 3-year-olds working 20 hours a day in dangerous conditions. What kind of society would put little children to work and think that's a good society? Is it basically we have wage slavery? People might be free, but they're so dependent upon their earnings that they get like trapped in their jobs and they're very unhappy and they work all day and they have no purpose to live. He says what's happened is people are now living in order to work. Right? The only reason we're alive is so we can work for the matrix. Okay? We spend so much time at our jobs that we really never get to enjoy it. And he said that's not the way things should be. We should work to live. Right? We work so that we can do enjoyable things, so we can have a good time, so we can talk to each other, so that we can be with our families on holidays. Okay? And work, instead we're putting the cart before the horse. Okay? Life's only become meaningful and so that we can make things. But we don't actually get to use the things that we make, or at least most of us don't. And he said, well, this makes capitalism a really inhumane system, because it makes us have a lot of things, but it's not going to make us very happy people. And so Marx basically does a takedown of Adam Smith. Well, I'm going to take another step back to this idea about religion. Because, we tend to think, Marxism is this big bad system. But you can find Marx's ideas in most religions. This idea that we do have responsibility, we're supposed to live a certain way. And Marx was really not saying, big state, government, central planning. He was basically saying that capitalism has many, many bad things about it. And in that way, he shared it with many religions at the time. Now, most religions put restrictions on making money. So, for example, there were restrictions on usury. Judeo-Christian, Islam, you're not supposed to make interest on loaning money. I'll get into this why this is later in the course. This idea that somehow, if you lent money, you had to give it free, right? If I loan you $10, you take my $10 and tomorrow you pay me back $10. I'm not allowed to say lend you $10 and tomorrow you have to give me $11, right? As like a tip. He said that's wrong. And to this day in the Muslim world, usury or lending money out at interest is immoral, unreligious, and in many places illegal. In the Jewish religion, they have this idea of Jubilee. Now, you're probably thinking of Jubilee as a X-Men character or maybe as a big party. But what Jubilee was that every, I think, 40 years or so, all private property was thrown into a big pot, and then it was all redivided. And so every 40 years, everyone will become equal again. In Islam and Christianity, you have ideas like zakat, the idea that you're supposed to give to charity. It's a basic obligation, basic requirement. And in Christianity, you have this idea of noblesse oblige, which is that if you're rich, the purpose of being rich is to give money back. You had ideas that there's something called a fair price. You're not supposed to charge anyone anything more than a fair price. You're not supposed to, let's say, gouge people and charge them above what it really is worth. You're not supposed to seek material wealth. You're supposed to try to be poor. And in most Eastern religions like Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, merchants, people who make money, and particularly people who don't make anything to make money, have very, very low social status. You know what? It wasn't like, you came from the rich kid. You didn't want to be the rich kid. Because if your parents made a lot of money, that meant you probably were really low status and looked down upon. Much better to be the son of a priest or a son of a warrior or a daughter of a warrior or priest. If your father was a trader, or if or ran a business or sold things, it was kind of like you were dirty. And so here's some kind of quotations from the Judeo-Christian religion that kind of support this idea, right? There's the parable, Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And in the Beatitudes he says, blessed are the poor, theirs is the kingdom of God. Basically the idea that to be poor is good, to be rich is a bad thing. And I'm not saying this is not just Christianity. I could go to almost any religion's religious text and they will say, great to be poor, give up your possessions, don't be tied to material things. And here we have one from the book of, I think this is from Amos, and this is from the Old Testament, the minor prophets, and he says, hearken to this, you who swallow up the needy and cut off the poor of the land, you who purchase the poor with money and the needy in order to inherit them in the refuse of the grain we will sell. The Lord swore, I will never forget any of your deeds. Shall not the land quake and its inhabitants be destroyed? Yea, it shall rise up wholly like the rain cloud, and it shall sink like the river of Egypt. Basically says, God, all you rich people who are taking advantage of the poor, I'm watching you, and guess what? Bad things are going to happen. So basically this idea that God supports capitalism doesn't really seem to have a basis in the religious text. But something funny happened on the way to the rapture. People started to actually think that religion, which had been opposed to making money, which had been opposed to, let's say, capitalism and certain types of progress, people said actually it seems like religion might actually be helping out. And particularly one person named Max Weber, or that was usually known as the Weber thesis, said the reason we got capitalism is because all of a sudden religion changed around 1600. We had this thing called the Protestant Reformation. And Protestantism was very different than all previous religions in how it had an outlook on making money. And particularly the Calvinists, and these are the Puritans that settled Massachusetts, and the Pilgrims, the guys with the tall black